Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on which part of the world you're listening to me from today. First of all, I'd like to give a shout out to Gregor and Richard for making this event happen yet again this year. And a very big thank you to both of them for letting me be a part of the event this year. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about overview of Azure monitoring. Monitoring is so important to the degree that when you don't have one in place, when you don't have monitoring in place, it's very difficult for you to keep track of the utilization of your Azure resources. But if you have monitoring in place and it's well configured, then you're able to stay on top of things with regards to the utilization of your Azure resources, and you're able to take action when necessary. So sit back, relax yourself, and let's have some good time learning some Azure monitoring. Okay, so let's start with a little bit about me. My name is Kazeem Adegboyega. I'm a Microsoft Azure MVP from Nigeria. You can follow me on Twitter at Kazeem Can Teach. And please do feel free to check out my YouTube channel, Tech Talk Wednesday with Kazeem, where I host other industry professionals to discuss tech-related topics with more focus on Microsoft Cloud technologies. So here is my agenda for you today. We're going to start things off with overview of Azure Monitor. Next, we'll take a look at Azure Monitor at a glance, and I'm going to be walking you through how Azure Monitor truly works, and we'll wrap things up with some cool demos. So, Azure Monitor overview. You see, to have Azure Monitor work well for you, it will require you going beyond just having it turned on. So you will need to have it be well set up and configured correctly. Now, let's take a look at some of Azure Monitor overview. First, Azure Monitor is a resource on Azure that helps you to do monitoring and logging. So just like you have all the resources on Azure, so the Azure Monitor itself is a resource that you have up on Azure that you can use to do monitoring and logging. And next, it helps you to collect and analyze data about the various resources we have up on Azure so that you're able to improve the performance of those resources, right? It also helps you with proactive monitoring via the use of alerts, right? When certain conditions are met, it triggers a certain action to happen, right? So Azure Monitor helps you tell who is doing what to your resources and what people are doing to your resources at the same time. So the cool thing, of course, is that all the monitor data can also be visualized so that you see what's going on with your Azure resources at any given point. Now let's see what Azure Monitor looks like at a glance. Within Azure Monitor, we have metrics, and logs, which we're going to get to in just a little bit here. These metrics can collect data from a variety of sources to include applications, operating system that you have on-prem or on Azure, such as Azure resources, Azure subscriptions, or even Azure tenants. And we have the ability to also pull data from some custom sources as well. If you're new to Azure Monitor, it is important to note that Azure Monitor is not just for monitoring resources that we have up on Azure alone, but we can also use it to collect data from VMs that we have on-prem. So what you will just need to do is to ensure that you have an agent be installed on those VMs first. So back to metrics and logs. So you see, we need to have where the data is going to be stored for Azure Monitor. So Azure Monitor collects data from all these resources and store them into either the metrics or the logs. For the metrics, The metrics is a way of collecting data, and then Azure Monitor then uses these metrics to visualize it in the form of charts, right? So metrics are numerical data that defines properties such as CPU usage, memory usage, network usage, and so on. Now, the event and performance data, traces and so on that are related to specific applications are stored in the Azure Monitor log. The log tells us what kind of error happened, right? Now, once we have data collected into either the matrix or the log, Azure Monitor now has what it needs to analyze and act on that data. So which brings us to the next step, where we can now choose how you would like to consume the data that has been collected and how you would like to analyze the data as well. So first, we have Insights. Insights comes bundled with every Azure resources that you create, right? Two, you can also choose to visualize the data that Azure Monitor collects by creating dashboards. Power BI can also be used to create dashboards as well. Another way to analyze the data is with Matrix Explorer or Log Analytics. So Matrix Explorer is a sub-service of Azure Monitor that allows you to visualize or plot charts. And it also allows you to investigate spikes in your matrix value, as well. Now, Azure Monitor also gives you the ability to respond to critical events, right? So where you create alerts, and when certain conditions are met, you are able to, Azure Monitor is able to take action as necessary, depending on what you have configured. And lastly, it is possible to connect Azure Monitor with other tools such as Event Ops, Logic Apps, and so on. Next, let's take a look at how Azure Monitoring truly works. First, we need to note that Azure Monitor service does not directly monitor resources that you have up on Azure. So instead, what happens is that Azure Monitor evaluates data that is collected within a log analytics workspace. Log analytics workspace. So if you're wondering what that is, Log Analytics Workspace is an environment for logging data within Azure. So in a nutshell, this is where data collection and analysis happens within Azure. So you see, when you have a workload up on Azure, workloads such as, let's say, virtual machine or VNet or NSG, right? These individual resources have that capability of generating event logs and performance data for review and evaluation themselves, right? So when they generate these logs and performance information, this information are then stored in the log analytics workspace. And then you have the storage account, right, connected to the workspace. So you get to view what is inside the storage account from the workspace. So you don't view them directly from the storage account, but you get to view them from within the workspace. So all this data and information that we have in the log analytics workspace is what then gets revealed to us by the Azure Monitor. So in reality, this is how the process of monitoring works with the Azure Monitor. So enough talks, it's time for the demo. And in this demo, I'm going to be showing you how to turn on monitoring for a resource. That's for resources that you have upon Azure. So we'll take a look at how to configure metrics and logs, and we'll wrap things up with me showing you how to work with alerts. All right, so we're going to start this demo by turning on monitoring for an Azure resource. So the resource in this case would be a virtual machine. Now, there are multiple ways to do this. One way will be to turn it on from the Azure Monitor itself, and another way would be to turn it on from the VM blade, right? So I'm going to walk you through the two steps. So if I'm looking to use the Azure Monitor to turn it on, so I'm going to click, or you simply search, do a search for Azure Monitor. So from the Azure Monitor blade, I'm going to scroll all the way down to virtual machines. Virtual machines. Good. So as you can see, I have some of my VMs have been monitored already, but I still have at least one VM that is not monitored. So if I click on not monitored, so I can see, you can see here that I have server 2. Monitoring is not enabled at the moment for server 2. So for me to turn on monitoring for this server, it's as easy as clicking on the enable button. So when I click on the enable button, I will need to enable this, right? So enable, and what this is going to ask us to do is to create a log analytics workspace. So you can create a log analytics workspace if you don't have one already. You know, you can use one that you already have, or you spin up a new one. So I have a few log analytics workspace here. So I'm just going to pick one from the list, choose a valid subscription, and you can go ahead and enable this. So this is one way of getting it done. If you remember from the slides, I did mention that the log analytic workspace comes in handy when it comes to collection of those data. You know, all the different data that the VM in this case is going to be gathering. It needs a place to dump those data. So that is the essence of the log analytics workspace. And I mentioned in the slide earlier that log analytic workspace is the environment where data collection and analysis happens within Azure. So this is one way of doing it. Another way of doing this would be to come to the VM itself. So I'll go to my VM blade. So I get to see a list of all the VMs that I have running on this current subscription, on this my current Azure subscription. So I will click, I know that I don't have monitoring turned on for my server 2. So I'm going to click on server 2. So from the server 2, from my VM blade, I will scroll all the way down to Insights. So you want to click on Insights under monitoring. And as you can see here as well, that it brings us to the same place where I'm going to click on enable. And once I click on the enable button, it's going to prompt me to create a workspace or to use an already existing workspace, right? So how about I go ahead to use this particular workspace here, and I can enable monitoring for this VM. So it's going to take a little bit of time to set up monitoring for this particular resource, this particular VM. So now these are the two ways of turning on monitoring for any Azure, for an Azure resource, and in this case, I've done it for a virtual machine. One thing that is important to note is that your VM, your virtual machine, has to be on in order for you to enable monitoring for it. And once I have monitoring on, I'm now able to view things such as VM disk utilization, the CPU utilization, so on and so forth from the performance tab, right? So if I click on one that I already have it turned on for, so you can see I have performance here. So if you're doing it for the very first time, this page might you might not find any statistical data because it is still fresh. So you need to give it some couple of minutes, about 30 minutes to about 1 hour, in order for you to be able to gather those necessary information. And if I also go ahead to click on map, right? So I'm able to view things such as, I'm able to see telemetry information such as services connected to this particular VM, right? And remember, I can also do this from the Azure Monitor. So if I click on Azure Monitor and I go to my VM, good. So if I click on one of my VMs here, so you see I'm able to view performance, okay, to see what's going on with this VM. And I'm also able to click on the map, right? So map shows me what client do we have connected to this VM, and then the services, right, that we have connected to this VM. So you can see all the number of ports that you have open for this VM. Now, the same way you can monitor VM, you can also monitor other resources such as storage, networks, and so on. Next, let's take a look at metrics and logs, shall we? So I'm back to my Azure portal now. Let's take a look at logs and metrics for one of my VMs that I have here. So I'll go to the VM blade. I'll select this particular VM here and scroll down to metrics. Metrics are numerical values that are collected at regular intervals, right? It looks at things that are measurable, things such as disk I/O, CPU utilization, so on and so forth. So for instance here, I can try to measure things like, how about we check out CPU, percentage CPU. So you can see the graph showing us the CPU utilization. So you might want to see it over a period of time, right? So maybe you want to see what the utilization looks like over the past 12 hours, over the past 3 days, you get a picture. So you can filter from here. And next is logs. For logs, logs helps us to look at events that happens inside a VM, for example. Once we have the log event stored, we can then use log analytics to query it. By the way, it uses the KQL language, that's the coastal query language, which is quite similar to SQL. Let me go back to client 1. And you see we can come to logs from here. So there are multiple ways of getting this done. So I can do it from here, or I can choose to go to my log analytics to do it. So the difference is that when I do things from the log analytics, I'm able to perform operation for multiple VMs as opposed to working with individual VMs like the way that I'm doing now. Because I click on logs, I'm getting pre-built VM queries that I can work with on the fly. For example, if I want all pre-built queries for VM, so I have VM here, so it's going to be showing me pre-built queries for just VM. But if I want something else, so I can get to choose other resource type from here. Let's look at syslogs. How about we'll run this particular one. Okay, so let's see if I'm able to pull. Okay, there are no records. How about this is going to search for logins. How about we just search the entire syslog, right? Okay, so still I don't have anything to display in this case. How about we run another query if I'm trying to get the VM processes, right? Here we're able to see a number of activities happening. Now, please don't confuse this for activity log, right? Activity log is what stores everything that happens with your Azure resources. So it shows us all the activity happening on your Azure tenant, right? So that's activity log. And if you're trying to look up activity log, you simply will come to your search and look up, type in activity log. Good. So these are the list of activities that we have over a particular period of time. That's the last 6 hours. So if I'm looking to see more activities, so I can change these as appropriate. How about we see what happens over the last 1 week? So as you can see here, we're able to get more data out. So notice we have this tab here, event initiated by. So you're able to see exactly who is carrying out the activity, right? So you can see some of the activities carried out by me. And another tab that is very important is the status tab here. So you're able to tell if that particular operation, this is the operation name here, this is the person who initiated that operation, and it is under a particular subscription, right? And you're able to tell if it succeeded or if it failed. And finally, let's take a look at how to configure alerts using the Azure Monitor. So I'll click on the Azure Monitor blade. From Azure Monitor, I'm going to click on Alerts. So I'll try to create a new alert rule. So the first thing you need to do here is to make the alert rule target a particular resource or group of resources. So I'll click on Select Resource. So if I'm trying to filter by resource type, how about we try to configure an alert that measures the CPU utilization. So I want to get notified each time my CPU utilization for my VM hits 50%, or whenever it's greater than 50%, I want to get notified. So my resource type is going to be virtual machine in this case. Virtual machines. So how about we monitor two of my virtual machines, my client 1 and client 2. I'll click on Done. So what we need to do next is to configure your alert condition. So I'll click on Add Condition. You will notice there are two signal types at the moment with the Azure Monitor, and that includes matrix and activity log. For matrix alerts in Azure Monitor provides us a way of getting notified when one of your metric crosses a particular defined threshold, right? And for the activity log, they are best used to notify us whenever an event of interest happens. So in this case, I'm going to go with matrix. And remember, what I want to do is CPU. So let me get CPU percentage. So I want to get notified whenever my CPU utilization is greater than a maximum of 50%. So the next thing to do is for us to define our action. The action is going to be what gets triggered when an alert is detected. So I'll click on Add Actions Group. So I can choose to create a new action group here or simply use an existing one. An action group contains a user or list of users that you would like to notify. And the way you notify this user or these users would probably be via email or by doing SMS. So the most popular one here is email. So I've created one here. So how about I use one of these action groups that I already have created. So I'll click on OK. And next, you need to give your rule a name. So how about we give this CPU percentage greater than 50. So give it a description of your choice here, and you choose your severity level. So if you want it to be informational, or if the alert you want it to be classified as something critical. So you see a red instead of a blue for information, for instance. So I'll go with informational, and you click on Create Alert Rules. So in wrapping up, I'm going to summarize Azure monitoring with these 3 bullet points. So the job of Azure Monitoring is, one, to provide us with monitor and matrix information on the resources that we have up on Azure. Two, it also helps us to query and analyze logs. And please remember that these logs are generated by the resources that we have up on Azure, and that the log data is also stored and accessed from the log analytics workspace. And finally, we're able to set up alerts and take action as necessary. Thank you very much. I hope you find this content useful. My name again is Kazeem Adegboyega, and I wish you a great festive tech calendar learning. Bye.